Don't you love it when things are both easier and more affordable? Like when the rain washes your car for you. Or like when you save up to 10% by bundling your renters and auto insurance with USAA. Bundle with USAA and start saving. Get a quote today.
There are people out there all across the country pushing boundaries to grow the game of golf. Like champion speed golfer Lauren Cupp, who plays faster than anyone else. And Will Lowry, whose work in the golf community inspires more kids to get into the game. As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible. In golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader. Like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
The Athletic.
Another Marc Marquez double at a track we didn't expect it at. A Maverick Vinales performance that reminds us that he's the absolute best rider in history sometimes. And a lot of other stuff. This is the Race MotoGP podcast for the Qatar Grand Prix. Today I am your host, Val Khorounzhiy. Matt Beer is on vacation. I understand, but I envy him a little bit, even though this is a fun one to talk about. It's phenomenal, isn't it, that we were quite close to a scenario where we would have had the same rider win all 8 of the races to start the season. And yet, there's so much happening. There's so much work to do. Because sometimes you get one or the other. You get dominance, or you get the excitement and at least in dominance, you get to relax a little bit, take your foot off the gas, and courage. That has not been the case, has it?
I feel like we kind of got the... I hyped this up earlier in the year, right before the season started, where I was kind of saying, I hope we get a 2019 season if Marc is going to dominate, where at least there's lots of fun stuff happening. Yeah. And that was kind of the first 2019 race of 2025, because there was chaos happening. Maverick Vinales led a race on a KTM. Like, there was so much going on. And that's before, Alex ran into Marc, and Alex ran into Didier, and Didier ran into Mir, and the world champion ended up more battered than he was even previously, and just a chaotic race. One of those like proper enthralling, like something is going to happen every second. Every time you think it's going to quiet down, someone else does something stupid or something amazing, and it just turned into a real barnstormer of a MotoGP race.
Yeah, this one we'll remember for a while, even though the results don't necessarily reflect it. We'll get to Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia as we normally do in the second part of this podcast, but we have to start with Maverick Vinales. We have to start with KTM, a second place that turned into a 14th place with a 16-second time penalty at the finish. We will get to that penalty, even though I don't think there's a ton to say necessarily, but we will get to it. But firstly, let's talk about the Vinales performance. Now, the Race Members Club, very active in submitting questions for this one. Usually Matt does the question gathering, but he's off. I looked at the submissions for the first time in a bit, because I leave him to it. And I looked at it and I was like, that is an insane amount of interest. That is genuinely both very encouraging and also extremely daunting. Like, I have to select some of these. This is tough. Anyway, I've selected some of these. Jasper Pendlebury asks, the KTM looked a bit better on Sunday. I heard in the commentary there may have been a spec reversion. Is this true, or is it simply some Maverick magic? Duncan Bertram asks, how can Maverick go from finishing 42 seconds off the lead in 14th at Austin, a circuit he dominated last year, to just 2 seconds off the win this week? And Gabriel Cedeno asks, what did KTM change? The only thing I could notice was the removal of the salad box from the practice to the race. And just to quickly address a couple of those quickly, and that's why I brought him up specifically, is because I think the salad box, that's the rear seat unit, right? That's
the one that we think has a mass dampener in it.
Yeah. I think Enea Bastianini is only running that. And it must not be making a huge difference.
I think everyone is trying it at moments, but no one's really sold on it being it feels like someone draws the short straw every weekend to try it at a different circuit so that KTM can gather data. But the version that they have right now is not a competitive thing, really.
Pedro Acosta, he seems to have generally rejected it. Last I heard him speak about it, but that's not the silver bullet. Removing it or having it, I think that's not the big difference maker. So whatever KTM did change, and who knows at this point, but whatever KTM did change, it wasn't that. I also think it's important to note on Maverick at COTA versus here, he really was much better at COTA than the end result suggests. Yeah, he was not slow at COTA. His bike refused to work on Sunday, basically. Yeah. He ended up running up and down the grid for no reason because his bike refused to work. That's a Maverick special in that particular situation. But he was fast. So this wasn't like an outrageous shock in that sense, because Maverick has been gaining a bit of steam. We know the KTM sometimes is wonderfully good in Qatar, seemingly unexpectedly. We know Maverick can be really, really good in Qatar. But still, watching him lead the race on Sunday, I think there were a lot of expletives in our Slack chat, mostly from me, just like, what the, well, the rest of it. What's going on?
Someone described Maverick on my social media, and I can't remember who, so I apologize, as the best rider in the world for 45 minutes a year.
Yeah.
And I feel like we got his 45 minutes out of him. Like,
yeah,
he just has moments days where he wakes up. And honestly, while the result was the result was stupendous, and I mean the result as in where he crossed the line. We'll come to what happened afterwards, but he finished the race in second. That he finished the race in second, and that's excellent. But I don't think KTM are going to be able to take too much from it, because whenever we asked Pedro Acosta afterwards what had changed or what was different and what the story was, he was like, I've no idea. We didn't do anything different on the bike. The bike is basically the same bike as it was yesterday. His bike was better as well. The chatter issues that have been completely hamstringing them not went away, but improved dramatically. And they don't know why. and that there has to be a bunch of Austrians heading back to the factory today thinking, good result. But it's weird that we don't know why.
Yeah, and Acosta spoke earlier in the weekend, and it sounded quite, before Vinales basically overshadowed everything. The big KTM story of the weekend was Acosta, I think, coming in on Friday and basically saying that the house that KTM has built, the house being the RC16 bike, had a fundamentally unsound foundation. And he means this year's, and that he's going to go back to the 2024 spec on everything that he can. So, the engine is frozen, but I can't imagine they did much on the engine anyway, I presume. Yeah. Not much at all. Aero, hard to say how, the front aero obviously is homologated, so you can only do so much. You can't change it unless you use up one of the two homologation slots, but it's probably bike internals, presumably, I would imagine. Yeah. And I don't think Vinales did the same reversion, so I don't think it's that Acosta silver bullet search or anything like that, or them going back on spec. I think it was just Maverick Vinales finding his groove a bit with the bike and doing the usual Maverick Vinales thing. And I think you're sort of in the same boat there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see any other explanation from having talked to 4 KTM riders 4 times over the weekend that explains that, other than Maverick being Maverick. And the problem is that we've seen Maverick be Maverick so many times in the past that you kind of have to just presume that there's going to be an element of that anyway, because that's what he does.
But there's a more repeatable formula here, right? Because Maverick qualified well, which he can do. We know he can do. The parts of the weekend that don't involve other riders, he can execute extremely well, I think, repeatedly, generally speaking. He got a really good start, I think, in both races. Generally, he was up there. On the Aprilia, he couldn't. The Aprilia is just a worse starting bike. I think we know that. That's not a particular surprise. On KTM, Acosta basically had the theory that because Maverick, got the qualifying right, he put himself in a position to have the race that he needed to run and the race that Maverick needs to run. And when Maverick runs that race, he's very good. So this is going back to my old theory. Remember, I would sometimes say on this podcast hilarious stuff like, if Maverick Vinales is on a Ducati, he wins the championship or something like that. This is what I'm referring to. You put him in clean air, you put him in a situation where he has enough to sort of control the race, to run it the way he wants. He can be exceptional.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we saw.
I mean, he's always threatened to be exceptional.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, those first races for Yamaha, remember?
Yes, of course.
That like run of form when he jumped in the Yamaha and was just winning everything, or whenever he was the only person in Suzuki history to beat Leish as a teammate. Yeah. All of these moments that he's hinted that it's there, and I don't really think it's a surprise in the grand scheme of things that he's done it in a KTM even this early, because it's just peak Maverick. It really is, and obviously that something changed, whatever changed, that just took away that chatter issue, that just took away the thing that was hindering. And then boom, Maverick gets to be himself. And then next week we'll go to Jerez and we won't even see him on TV.
Look, maybe one day they'll figure out a combination of scenarios to make this a more permanent thing. There was a suggestion from somebody in the members club, and I presume, because I didn't see it on TV, but apparently Maverick said something like, this is the first time he's had a fast bike, and I would imagine what he means by that is fast. It's on a straight.
Yeah, it is.
Because Yamaha wasn't, Suzuki wasn't, Aprilia not really its thing.
And you speak to a few people in the paddock at the minute, and the KTM is the fastest bike.
Yeah.
Faster than even the Ducati, which was always...
Well, you speak to the speed trap.
Yeah, I mean, there's that too.
Yeah.
I never trust MotoGP speed traps too much because they tend to put them in braking zones and weird things like that. But speaking to rivals, you know, they're of the opinion that it's now substantially faster than the Ducati that was always the fastest thing ever.
Anyway, the fun part's over. Let's go into the tire pressures and the 16-second penalty. Now, the warning came up on the flag, and I think both you and I immediately knew what the game was. Yeah. Maverick Vinales was not expecting to lead the race. His crew chief would not have expected him to lead the race, and they led the race. They ran in clean air. Front tire went down. Maverick, for some reason, told the media that he wasn't paying attention to the dash, which is maybe not something I would say, generally speaking.
No, but it's very Maverick.
It's a little bit Maverick, isn't it?
Like it's very Maverick to just not be paying attention to anything that's going on around him apart from what he's doing on track.
Yeah,
this is a guy who maybe occasionally spends too much time paying attention to everything else and not enough time to what's going on track. So it's a net positive, but I believe it.
I think what we're saying is Maverick would have won like 20 titles in the 80s when there were no dashes and stuff. Just less stuff to worry about, less stuff to think about. Just go. Just do your natural thing. But Frank Quinn asks, and I really like this question because of what you mentioned. Did they put his rim in a wheelie bin to check for bubbles? Now that question relates to Pedro Acosta's let-off in a similar situation last year in Indonesia. He was under investigation for tire pressures, but they were able to demonstrate that there was there's damage to the wheel rim basically that was responsible to that. Yeah. By doing that. Yeah. Now, why is this relevant this time, Simon?
I don't think it is really.
Okay.
I think that no one I've ever spoken to about Pedro getting away with it last year was convinced in any way that you could have a cracked rim and a slow puncture that would have leaked air for long enough to have both affected your tire pressure and not affected the rest of your race. And the fact that MotoGP very unseriously scientifically conducted a test by putting a wheel into a wheelie bin full of water says a lot. But this one was totally different. Like the minute that we saw it, we were like, yeah, of course that's happened. There's no way on earth he expected to lead. And I would imagine that anything, even based on the words from team boss Hervé Poncharal afterwards, I would imagine that everything that happened after that, whether or not it involved wheelie bins full of water or not, was essentially window dressing, because they had to have known what the scenario was. They had to know right away. I'd imagine there was people inside the team who knew during the race that they weren't going to get to keep their position.
Do you Do you know if they did the wheelie bin thing this weekend?
I don't know. Although this is how deeply unserious MotoGP is sometimes. I don't know if they would have been able to, because the Qatar paddock doesn't have wheelie bins the same way as the paddock did whenever we last did it.
Right.
Because we use dumpsters in Qatar.
Just everything that has to do with the penalties is very touch and go, and it's very sort of...
That's a very polite way of putting it, Val.
But, a more fundamental question about this, and, many readers, listeners had this sort of query is, have we now created a MotoGP where basically people get penalized for running a better race than they expected?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the answer to that is yes. And then the question is that worse than the alternative, which would have been just mandating a starting tire pressure, right?
I mean, the alternative, well, it's probably not worse, because that scenario involves lots of people falling off.
Yeah.
The obvious solution to all of this nonsense would have been mandating mandatory tire tests like last season, where they had to use the new front tire so that it was developed enough to race it this year. And that didn't happen because Dorn are afraid of the teams, and the teams are loath to do anything that doesn't make them, and only them and no one else, go any faster. I mean, there was never ever going to be any chance of the teams realistically testing the new tire much last year the moment that Pecco Bagnaia said he loved it. Unless they were told to. That was game over at that point. So I must ask him at some point if he's aware that basically it's all his fault.
He should have said, this is the worst thing ever. I'm never going to win another race. And I think...
exactly. But genuinely, Marc Marquez would have. In fact, Marc Marquez did say that. So yeah, I mean, you got to give him the system sometimes. Maybe Pecco being too nice for his own good has once again bit him in the ass with that one. It frustrates me for so many reasons. It's not a Michelin problem.
Yeah.
I've said this over and over again. This isn't something that's Michelin's fault. It's the fact that we're stuck with this damn tire that no one will test. And what we have at the minute is the least worst scenario.
Yeah.
Because it's a fairly liberal interpretation of the original rule book that said that he would have been instantly disqualified, and that would have been it.
Yep.
And it's a hell of a lot better than the world where front tires fall off the rims at 220 miles an hour, 370 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, and you said that, if we mandated a starting tire pressure, that would have potentially come with more risk to the riders. And that's because...
It would have, the pressure would have come up quicker, and people would have had Joan Mir-esque crashes all the time.
Yeah, so, it's sort of, it's a very patchwork solution. Nobody likes it.
Yeah.
Nobody particularly wants it, but, sometimes that's just c'est la vie. And I agree there has to be a more fundamental change to it, but I'm also kind of a little tired of talking about it.
Oh, me too. Me too. Don't get me wrong.
You know what? We dodged a monumental bullet that he didn't win that race. If a win was taken away.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's twice now we've lost a podium.
Yeah.
Due to it, but we've not lost a win, and that it would have. I mean, it would have devalued the whole weekend, wouldn't it? It would have. It would devalues the whole sport when you have nonsense things like that.
I mean, if he had won, I think somebody would have sat on the sensor in the aftermath, and then the investigation would have just quietly been resolved because, oops, the evidence is damaged.
Spill a coffee over the measurement device.
I'm not saying that's what actually happened, but maybe it should have. Anyway,
do you know what we're going to start seeing soon? Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a really famous story from the Le Mans TT about Graham Crosby winning a race in a Suzuki with an oversized fuel tank and then punching the tank in joy as he crossed the finish line.
Oh.
And we're going to start seeing riders just carrying like flick knives or something. Just like taking a ball peen hammer to the rim of their wheel or something.
Well, in NASCAR, so when they're a little worried about passing post-race inspection, they've won the race, they do massive burnouts on the straight and they just wreck the car against the barrier or something. And then, oops, too damaged to check. Whoops. Going back to KTM for a second before we move on to the actual championship battle, which KTM is still not part of it. Who knows, based on weekends like that.
KTM are part of a very, very fierce championship battle.
For rank D of the concessions.
Because whenever you look at the constructors' points, they're insanely close at the minute if there's no Ducati.
Yeah.
Everyone else is separated by like 4 points or 5 points covering the other 4 manufacturers. Yeah. That is actually really good.
No,
it's just a shame that it's the battle for 7th.
Yeah, but I don't think the championship would be better off without Ducati, but it is at least good to see that there's at least 2 tiers instead of 5 tiers. Motobell asks, can we stop hyping Acosta? It was brilliant in Moto2, but also cleanly beaten at the end by Fermin and Aldeguer. I'm always saying this. This sounds like something I would say. He is not Mark Lorenzo or Stoner or Rossi. None of them were summarily outperformed by people on the same bike like he has been. I love the intensity of the character, his crazy training, riding style, interviews, the whole package. He acts a bit entitled, but hasn't done anything to earn it. I don't think he will be a modern great.
I need to address the entitled point, because I've heard this before and I've been waiting for the right opportunity to go on a bit of a rant about this. He isn't at all. And I think that is just people misconstruing his personality and his character to think that he is. Because what he does, I think sometimes that makes him sound entitled, is kind of dismiss the others around him. Especially Marc Marquez. He did it in Coda whenever he said that, he had essentially told Mark inside his own helmet to F off from the front of the grid if he wanted to, because everyone else was ready to race. I think that's not Pedro being entitled. That's Pedro being deeply, deeply frustrated with 5 years of being constantly compared to Marc Marquez. And seeing like every time Mark is mentioned in his presence as some sort of a dig against his character.
Yeah.
And I genuinely don't think he's entitled. In my dealings with him, he's not. He is the only rider who will come to the media center and do his media debrief and then spend another 20 minutes kind of catching up with his Spanish journalist friends or going and making sure that his photographer is having a good weekend and thanking him for all the work and stuff like that. He ain't an entitled kid at all. And that's always struck me as a bit of a weird thing that people think that there are riders in MotoGP I would call entitled, and he's not one of them.
Here's what because reading that, honestly, the issue of entitled as a personality didn't even come to mind. Because when I read a sentiment like that, and I find myself like not necessarily agreeing with it, but at least understand where it's coming from. It's like entitled to success at this early stage of his MotoGP career, like entitled to be winning already. I mean, entitled to be running further.
If he was in a Ducati, he would be.
Yes.
And that's kind of the fundamental problem with where, measuring his ability at the minute. He isn't riding the bike that Fermin Aldeguer is riding right now. And if he were, he wouldn't be where he is. If he was riding the bike that Ayagura is riding right now, he wouldn't be where he is either. And I think that you can't judge. He has been consistently the best KTM performer.
No, I agree.
Across the last 18 months. I would go as far as to say, because I know Brad Binder only just pipped him in the championship last year, but Acosta was better.
I agree.
And I think that you can't judge him, demote him as not the best KTM rider by Maverick having a Maverick weekend.
Yeah. I mean, for me also, like at his peak, Maverick Vinales is a top 5 talent in MotoGP, and he isn't 5th and probably not 4th either. Mm-hmm. So that's, that kind of thing will happen. I think maybe the second year leap relative to the other KTM guys hasn't necessarily happened, although, Brad Binder is the usual yardstick for Acosta. Brad Binder has had a really, really, really bad weekend.
It's been awful.
Brad
Binder's had a really bad season.
Yeah. And he's, we know he's legit. So
there hasn't been one race this year so far out of the 8 we've had now where I've done my usual of 2024 and went, oh, but there's Binder.
Yeah.
Because he's suddenly in the mix for top 6. And we've seen more of those fights this year than we ever have because, kudos to Dorna, the TV direction is getting better. We're seeing more of mid-pack action. And Binder's just not in it either. Yeah. And if he is, he's going backwards.
Yeah, it's been tough on his side. And it's just clear, KTM with what it's doing, you can't entirely take it at face value. I think it's fair to have questions over whether, just anointing Acosta as a great who's definitely going to be phenomenal going forward. I haven't, but he still remains like as an asset, as a projected asset.
I still think he is, for no other reason other than there's no one else who I think is it coming up through the ranks who is as talented as him right now? And he's going to be around for a hell of a lot longer than any of the guys that are winning at the minute. So who else do you see winning the 2030 title at the minute? It's going to be him versus, bitter rival from Vinales.
I agree. Who's also, again, I always say, younger than we think.
No, I know. But it's going to be, his time will come. And he's not in a Marquez-esque situation where he's arrived onto the best bike in the world against a lineup that was a little bit chaotic following the departure of Stoner and everything. And yeah. Marquez wouldn't have won his first title in 13 if his teammate had been Stoner instead of Pedrosa.
Yeah, I agree completely.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses.
I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Hi, this is Javon, your Blinds.com design consultant.
Oh, wow. A real person.
Yep. I'm here to help with everything from selecting the perfect window treatments to...
Well, I've got a complicated project.
No problem. I can even help schedule a professional measure and install. We can also send you samples fast and free.
I just might have to do more.
Whatever you need.
So the first room we're looking at is for...
Shop Blinds.com now and save up to 40% site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Acura's all-new ADX, a compact SUV that isn't just built for one thing, it's precision crafted for everything. To escape the grind with available all-wheel drive. To go with your flow with available Google built-in.
Hey Google, turn it up.
Okay, turning up the volume. And crafted to be heard with an available Bang & Olufsen premium sound system. The all-new Acura ADX, crafted to match your energy. Acura, precision crafted performance.
Take your vibes and go, 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 go.
Google is a trademark of Google LLC.
In the Race MotoGP Podcast tradition, we finally get to the race winner and the title fight, like half an hour into the episode. We're the best there is, baby, at that. Absolute legends when it comes to that. Marc Marquez versus Pecco Bagnaia this weekend, and also Alex Marquez was again in the mix, and so were the other Ducatis. I want to ask you to try to remember how you felt going into the weekend. What result did you expect out front?
I don't remember where I was last night. I expected Marquez to be fighting against the likes of Giannantonio for second behind Pecco Bagnaia. And I think ultimately I was a little bit vindicated in feeling that way by kind of the pace that we saw from Bagnaia at points during the weekend. But the qualifying ended any chance he had of doing that. And I think actually he managed to do a fairly decent job of turning a damage limitation race, pulling a damage limitation race out of a terrible, terrible weekend. His post-qualifying comments of how terrible everything had been for him just absolutely hit the nail on the head. And he knew on Saturday lunchtime that the weekend was essentially done for. And I mean, that takes absolutely nothing away from Marc Marquez being stupendous at picking up the pieces. And you cannot, we're in a season where you cannot let Marc Marquez pick up the pieces from your disaster. And that's exactly what happened. But I think there is an element of Marc getting, I don't want to say lucky this weekend, because he was obviously, he managed the tyre so well against Vinales. But if Pecco had started alongside him in the grid and Giannantonio hadn't been ran into by Alex Marquez, do you think we would have had a Marc win on Sunday?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because honestly, yeah, it's genuinely.
Okay.
But so I think I disagree a bit on that one. I genuinely, just from the evidence of the whole weekend, even crash aside, I think it's a 50-50 at best between Marc and Pecco. Because the ease with which Marc was able to sort of Andrea Dovizioso the race in the way that he did, sort of holding the pack back up. And also, just as a side note, I loved his, and also I think Alex Marquez's comments to post-race of, they saw Franco Morbidelli go and they were like, yeah, sure, whatever, knock yourself out, enjoy that one. They knew immediately the tires would not last. They were, of course, completely right.
One of my favorite comments of the weekend was someone asked Alex on Saturday after the sprint what it was like, once again finishing second to Marc, and he was just like, he's Marc Marquez. Go ask Dovey what it feels like finishing second to him.
But yeah, I think maybe Marc coming into the weekend slightly overstated how bad he historically is at Qatar, because just looking through it, I'm not convinced it's as horrific as he's made it seem. And always, by his lofty standards, it was not a good track for him, but he's not fundamentally poor there. I think I had a perception that he was, because I remember that weekend where Paul Spargaro had his number, the only weekend in their year, couple of years as teammates together. But otherwise, I don't think he's been fundamentally bad there. But it's also, so Cams asks, why does it seem like Marc's level is more consistent than before? He seems to be exceptional everywhere rather than mind-bendingly good at some tracks and merely great at others. Is it a legacy of the injury, the current regs? It seems this season like he had less margin at Austin and more at tracks like Qatar than in his Honda days. I agree with that. I think that's accurate, but I think that's the Ducati.
Yeah, I think it's because the Ducati is more neutral bike.
Yeah.
The Honda was superb at certain places because he had basically built a bike to suit his own riding style, and that riding style is better at the places where he dominated, so the bike became more that way, that super front end focused bike that he could do magic on. And I think that the sign for me, the proof of that being the Ducati rather than anything else, is that we've stopped seeing the Marc Marquez front end testing the limits practice crashes.
Yes. Yeah, he's staying on the bike a lot more, apart from at Kota.
Yeah.
Where he really, really should have stayed on.
He's still done a bit of crashing this year, but not the way we used to see. Not the when 19 races crashed 20 times years that he had in 18 and 19.
Yeah, but this is also just looking through the whole weekend. Of course, Pecco's qualifying crash really sabotaged him, but he seemed to make up for it okay at the start of Sunday's race, and he said he burned up the tire trying to do that. But even if you account for that, I think it's still just a 50-50. And for me, the issue there is it's a 50-50 when it really, ideally for Pecco, needs to be a 75-25.
Yeah, it should have been this weekend.
And he, even if the fact that he didn't capitalize is one thing. The fact that he didn't have the margin that he might have enjoyed for me is the other. So for this, Annie asks, it's really easy to play armchair psychologist. Yeah, it is. I do it all the time. All the time. That's 60% of this job here, or at least the job that I do. And guess at how rattled Pecco is, but as a man on the ground, that's you in this case, Simon, how is he coming across as feeling?
So I've seen this a lot, this kind of various levels of aggressive armchair psychology, and that is the least aggressive level of it, that right there. I've seen it kind of from various people and from people who used to be in the paddock over the last few weeks and months, and it is not at all reflected in how Pecco sounds and acts. He actually is. I mean, there's always a certain intensity with Pecco, because that's just who he is. He's always quite a focused sounding guy anyway. And I think because he's quiet and kind of thoughtful, it makes him sound maybe apprehensive about speaking sometimes. But this is not someone that I think is nervous. I asked him about it on Saturday during his media scrum, and he kind of came close to losing his temper a little bit with various unnamed people in the paddock, and went in a bit of, or who used to be in the paddock, and went in a bit of a rant about social media comments and about how easy it is to say things whenever you haven't a clue what you're talking about. And I feel like I'm attacking the people that have asked this question, so I'm sorry, but neither Pecco or I are doing that. But he was definitely he was very quick to defend himself in a way that had the kind of impassioned intensity you'd both expect of Pecco Bagnaia, and which kind of makes me think that it's true too, because it's reflected in how he's acting in real life as opposed to in the few seconds you see of him on TV every weekend.
Pecco, lots of people are saying you're under pressure, the mistakes are because of Marx. And I'm pretty sure this isn't the reason, but like, what do you say to that?
That luckily I don't listen too much to what people are saying. I know that sometimes people are speaking, sometimes they say something that are not thinking, just because they need to be put again on to some riders, some ex-riders that maybe are starting to be forget, need to be again at the top, so they say something that maybe are not thinking. Also some ex-engineers or engineers that are working here. So luckily I'm not listening to it, but I like when I see something like this, because pressure is always there in any case, and in any case when you're fast, people are speaking about you in the bad, in the good. So as people are speaking about me as something, because it's meaning that I'm doing a good job. So I will try continue working on being faster and faster and faster, try to be competitive, and I really want that the pressure will be by my side all the career.
Alex AG asks, is the expectations going forward more leaning towards Pecco fighting for the third step of the podium? Mark and Alex had his number throughout. Frankie seems to be able to fight for third as well. I think that's an overstatement of
yeah.
I don't think Alex hit his number this weekend. I think Pecco just, like, Alex Pecco should have had covered throughout considerably. But that, I'm actually not sure when that question came in, because it might have come in after the sprint or something, in which case it's more justifiable, because we're again having the Pecco Bagnaia sprint race situation. Kieran asks, what is the issue with a smaller fuel tank used during the sprint? Why can't the larger tank be used? By regulations, it cannot. So you cannot half fill the 22-liter tank. You need to have the 12
which
liter.
is a bit silly,
I guess. Yeah, a little bit, but also, I mean, there's got to be a reason for why you can't.
I'd imagine it's to stop people from overfilling it.
Yeah.
But then you spot check or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, but it might be easier to do it as a sort of just a capacity check. It sort of makes sense to me, and it's. Now I definitely don't want that rule to be made, because it'd just be helping Pecco, and he really needs to figure this one out by himself.
Yeah.
Because nobody else is mentioning this as an issue. And again, we saw it on Saturday, and I don't think he's had a meaningfully worse sprint than he usually does. That's the worrying part. I think he had a worse grid position than he usually does, and he cannot make progress in the sprint.
Yeah, he just can't go forward in the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he rides the race just hammering the front and not letting anybody overtake him. He rides a KTM race.
Yeah.
is what he does generally in the sprint. And that's a problem championship wise. I don't like to say that the sprints cost him the title last year, but like mathematically they did.
Yeah.
So that is a situation he badly needs to address. Again, we're ignoring Alex Marquez a little bit. We'll get to him for another reason in a little bit, but let's talk about the Marc-Alex collision. Iontihi, which apparently, I thought that was the contributor's name, the Members Club question asker's name, but apparently it's like a character from a German satirical sci-fi series or something. I've never heard of it. That's a fun one. I like learning that kind of stuff. But he said, today's race showed a massive rivalry to the point where they did not care if the other one would crash. It could look like that from the onboard, but I think nothing could be further from the truth. It was very circumstantial. Mark lost the rear a little bit coming through turn one. He checked up. Alex ran into him because he was too close behind, and he thought Mark had gotten on the throttle, and Mark had, but then rolled off. So it just a concertina effect, wasn't meaningful aggression. There was no, I think, hint of aggression in the way they raced each other after that. Maybe it will come at some point this season that they don't get along over something. But on this one, after the race, Mark was very quick to say, you know what, that one was probably my fault. And Alex was equally seemingly initially thinking it was his fault before hearing out Mark and going, oh, okay. So that's what happened. So no hard feelings there at all. Does it surprise you, or does that... we know that those guys are thick as thieves, right?
Yeah.
But most brother relationships are not tested at this level.
Yeah, and when they are, it tends to be a bit more in the line of normal rider interaction, a la Paul and Elish, who did have their occasional wobble. I mean, I think it was a bit of one of those incidents where, you know, Mark felt he had blame and he came off worse from it anyway. And if it had damaged his race substantially, it would have been interesting to see what the dynamic would have been.
Yeah.
But the fact that he then went on to win the race and that Alex went on to do something much dumber means that kind of the any sting was took out of the bite of both of them, because both of them had something else to worry about afterwards. I'd imagine there's a more than healthy amount of abuse being given between the two of them about it right now today, than there is about than there was at the time, or any actual malice. The worst brother relationship we encountered at the weekend was by far the comments made by Moto2 podium finisher Deniz Onku, whose brother Can won a World Supersport race a couple of hours before as well at Assen. And when asked about basically, you know, which of them was the most talented rider in the world now, then Deniz said, "Oh, it's great, it's fine. We're going back to Turkey. We'll both be back in Turkey on Monday, and there's no race control there, so I'm going to smash him." Which is very Deniz.
I'm Dane Brugler. I cover the NFL draft for The Athletic. Spending the whole year working on a draft guide, I'm looking at thousands of players, putting together hundreds of full scouting reports, all the nitty-gritty details, the testing data, the stats, but extensive background research as well. Every journey is a little bit different. I'm on the phone with a lot of these guys. Hey, when did you start playing football? What other sports did you play? Tell me about your family. You know, learning more about these guys as people. Our draft guide picked up the name The Beast because of the crazy amount of information that's included. I have no idea how to quantify the hours I've spent putting it together. I've been covering this year's draft since last year's draft. There is a lot in The Beast that you simply can't find anywhere else. You can get The Beast and all the great coverage my colleagues do by subscribing to The Athletic. You can do that at theathletic.com/subscribe.
All right, now for the bummer part of the podcast. Jorge Martin was back this weekend, getting back to the speed of things, and then unfortunately he fell on Sunday, fell in the path of a terrified Fabio Di Giannantonio, who described it as basically like a harrowing experience for him. And you know, when you look at the replay, it's not obvious immediately, but when you look at the replay slowed down. Yeah, it was. I mean, let's not even think about what it was and what it could have been.
And yeah, just he was in front of me a bit while. I was pretty close to him. Tried to overtake him for sure. And once he crashed, his body was completely in front of my bike. So there we go, 200 something, almost more or less. If he's not 200, he's 160, 180. You know, it's like this. It's a really fast corner, and
Which corner?
At 12, entering to turn 13, and I didn't had any chance to go anywhere, so I touched him. For this, I was pushing for the race, but I was thinking of him all the race because I was really scared. And for this, I stopped outside of this box just at the end of the race because I wanted to know from the team that he was okay, and this is the most great thing of today.
Were you surprised when you came around in the next lap and there was no red flag and he was still...
Actually yes, because I have goosebumps because it was the baddest scene of my life, honestly. It was a super bad crash and he was still on the ground. I was seeing the screens trying to understand if he was okay or not. He was still on the ground, so I was doing the lap and they were saying, hey, we have to see if he's okay, you know. But then luckily, maybe because if he was okay, and for this it was not a red flag, so it's been okay, like this at the end.
But, you know, what it could have been, what it still is, you know, Jorge Martin's significantly hurt, and as of taping, he remains in the Hamad Hospital in Doha with a lung. What was a pneumothorax?
Pneumothorax. Yeah.
But like, what's the layman's terms for that? Punctured lung?
It's not quite a punctured lung. It basically means there's air in his chest cavity.
Yeah.
Which is probably caused by at least one of the 11 broken ribs he also suffered, and it means that he's at risk of a punctured lung.
Yeah.
The biggest issue for him with this, I think, what we're going to see the biggest long-term effect, because we've seen similar incidents in the past. The last one I can remember having a really substantial one of these was John McPhee at Phillip Island in like 2017.
Right.
And the big issue with it will be getting home, because you can't fly after such an injury.
Oh, right. Okay.
So either he's going to have to spend a fairly substantial couple of weeks in Doha recuperating, or they're going to have to charter a special air ambulance that can fly at low level to get him home, which is a kind of a painful, slow, fuel inefficient experience that involves lots of stop-offs to refuel and hitting lots of turbulence and all sorts of terrible. So they're going to have to come up with a way to either get him home or to make him quite comfortable in Doha, because until he gets the doctors okay to do that, he's in for a bit of a long wait. I think whenever it happened to McPhee, off the top of my head, he ended up spending like 6 weeks in Australia, and then his medical insurance insisted on flying a doctor out from the UK to sit in the seat next to him on the flight home.
Right.
Just to give an idea of how serious this is, you know.
Yeah, it's
and even when he recovers from this, we're going to see it like this is going to significantly dent his training, because he's going to spend weeks not able to breathe properly without agonizing pain, as anyone who's ever cracked a rib will be able to tell you, let alone 11 of them. He's going to spend a long time sitting doing nothing, and you know, considering he's already lost quite a bit of time, we know from people like Fabio Di Giannantonio how quickly you burn through
the muscle
mass if you're in, you know, if you've got a 0 body percent fat the way these guys do. And Jorge is one of the guys that's probably the lowest in that regards. His muscles are going to start eating themselves pretty quickly. He's going to have a long rehab from this one, I think.
Yeah, generally just screw the recovery timing. I'm more preoccupied, even though, again, you know, it's not his first time being hurt exactly. So, you know, these guys, they know what to do, and they know how to deal with themselves when they do it. But I mean, this has been like all year in hospital, basically, in a sense, hasn't it? All year doing CT scans, all year with wires and tubes and
there's the potential here for this to be really psychologically tough.
Of course.
If you're not Jorge Martin. And I think that is the saving grace of this, is that it's him, and we know how he responds to this. We've seen it before, that rookie season where he looked to be on the verge of race wins really early on, at the huge Phillip Island, or the huge Portimao shunt that set him back months, and then he basically got back in the bike and won a race. And I think that there'll be an element of that about this. This will be not the terrible situation for him that it would be for some others.
I was going to say something like, let's hope we see him back as soon as possible, but I don't think I feel that way.
Yeah, no, I don't want to see him back. And I mean, that's kind of the elephant in the room here. Like, did coming back too soon help facilitate this happening? Did coming back too soon from the original crash and jumping on a supermoto bike help facilitate the breaking of the wrist? And I don't know, but I don't know if it looked like the sort of crash that was caused by a little bit of attention
fatigue
disappearing. Fatigue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was he did something a little bit silly.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to attack him, because it happens. It's part of racing. But I don't think that the normal, super aggressive, super focused Jorge Martin would have just ran that wide if he'd been fully fit and fully focused and not fatigued from injury and pain.
I mean, sometimes a fully fit Jorge Martin pits for wets on a dry track, so I mean,
now there are riders who, if they did something like this, you'd be like, wow, there he goes again. but it's not Jorge Martin when he's having a good race relative to to what his expectations were. So I do wonder.
Yeah, in any case, obviously, however his season plays out from now on, just as long as he gets himself through this and in decent mental shape and decent physical shape, and then we can start talking about what he can actually achieve on track again. Let's get to less serious topics, but not quite to the full ridiculous topics yet, I think. Alex Marquez and Fabio Di Giannantonio, we've mentioned this before, so Fabio Di Giannantonio would have been firmly in the mix for a Grand Prix podium on Sunday. I don't think better, but for a podium, I'm fairly confident. He overtook Alex Marquez at turn 10, and then Alex Marquez tried to return favor at turn 12, did it in a really clumsy, bad way, took both of them off the track, ended Di Giannantonio's race effectively. After the race, credit to Alex Marquez, he was immediately like, that's my bad, I should not have done that. The penalty was fair. He tried to seek out and apologize to Giannantonio and was told by VR46, now's not the time to try to do it later. And then you spoke to Di Giannantonio in the media session, and he made it very, very clear now was not the time. Indeed.
The only thing that I think is that in our level of championship, in the MotoGP World Championship, this kind of mistakes are a bit on the limit, honestly. We can accept it maybe in Moto3. You can accept it maybe in Moto2. You can accept it maybe from a rookie MotoGP, the first time that he's on the front, when you are with a lot of emotions. But in our level of riders, we must avoid this kind of situation because it's dangerous. This sport is dangerous. That maneuver was really dangerous. He put me really in danger at the end because I was lucky to don't crash. If I would crashed, I don't know if I was here speaking to you now. Maybe I was on the medical center trying to see if I was okay, because in that point we are going 200 more kilometers per hour, and you have to be extra conscious, let's say, especially on the fourth lap of the race.
Maki Avga asks as part of a longer sentiment, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. I've tried to look it up where the name might come from etymologically, and I completely failed. So maybe Mackay potentially. I don't know. So let me know. Not overtaking Marc when he was riding slowly early in the race. However, as soon as Digia got ahead, he being Alex, sends one of the worst overtakes this season. What is that about? What am I missing?
I mean, he had already run into Marc at this point.
He had already run into Marc. But I think this was part of this, obviously, Alex will not be as aggressive on Marc as he will be on some other riders. I think that's fair to say. But in that particular situation, it definitely wasn't any sort of protecting Marc or anything. What it was Alex Marquez realizing the kind of race Marc Marquez was trying to run and going, I want myself a piece of that at the finish. And then when Digi overtook him, immediately feeling, no, I want to be behind Marc. Marc knows what he's doing here. Marc's running the race that I also want to run. So that's the justification. There's even, Di Giannantonio fully agreed. There was nothing malicious in it. It was just clumsy and bad. And it's fair to ask, because Di Giannantonio, again, did ask, is a single long lap enough for this kind of thing? Nobody was down on the ground. But Di Giannantonio's weekend is in the garbage chute.
It was an appropriate penalty for this instance, in this circumstance, where it's the first time this year that Alex Marquez has done something a bit silly with the new stewards in place.
Okay.
I think that's the we've seen stewarding this year be better than it was in the last few years. So I think with that in mind, it then becomes quite difficult to use precedent from previous years to to kind of handle these incidents. I think what we're going to see this year from kind of conversations I've had is a dramatic escalation where the next time Alex does something like this, and it's Alex, there will be a next time, it won't be a single long lap. He won't get the same penalty again. He'll get the double long lap, or he'll get, you know what I mean? Things will escalate quickly this year because that seems to be what the stewards are intent on doing, punishing repeat offenders.
Yeah.
And but under the kind of unique circumstances of Alex's first mistake with a new judge in town, fair enough.
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, if I was in charge of it and also could do absolutely anything I wanted with like matter and the universe, you would just teleport Alex Marquez behind Fabio Di Giannantonio at that point in the race. But that's not practical. I understand.
In a perfect world from 10 years ago, and one that we should have right now if I had my way, it would have been 2 penalty points on his license.
Yeah. So
this is where the penalty point system, because then it reminds everyone of what they're doing.
No, yeah, that's fair enough. It's just like, imagine this kind of thing happening between Marc and Pecco, and then somebody benefits massively in the points because of that, and suddenly it gets a lot more.
Imagine this sort of thing happening between Alex and Pecco, and then someone massively benefits the points from it.
I could not possibly imagine that. That is outside the realm of my imagination. This one isn't a question for us to tackle. I just found it funny. I'm being a bit mean by including it because he wrote it before the Grand Prix. But Rafael asks, why does Simon no longer use the phrase Jack Miller does Jack Miller things? Meaning,
I'm pretty sure I used it in our Slack chat at least twice this weekend.
I really liked Jack Miller's start to life in Yamaha. This was a really, really bad weekend. He knows it. We all know it. So
yeah.
No need to.
Although it sounds like it was a bit. I'm not gonna without being someone that rushes to defend Jack doing silly things, and he did. The first crash of the weekend was just the first 2 crashes of the weekend.
Yes,
were Jack being Jack. The third one, it sounds like they somehow in the race randomly developed massive chatter.
Yeah.
That was just like absolutely hamstringing him and forced the crash.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was particularly a Jack.
Yeah.
A Jack caused crash, and he also didn't do the Jack Miller thing of blaming the tyre for the chatter, which is something he's been, he likes having a scapegoat for these things. He said that no, it's something they have to figure out.
They all like a scapegoat for these things. I mean,
and it's always Michelin.
Yeah. Fermin Aldeguer, bless him, phenomenal weekend. On Sunday, there was a part of me that's like, you gotta be in the mix for a podium. And then after the race, I listened to him, and he was like, "Oh, my tire wasn't very good." I'm like, okay, so you also thought you should be in for a podium.
But also, my tire isn't very good because I'm absolutely hammering it at the early stages of the race.
Oh man, Fermin Aldeguer has finally become a MotoGP rider by doing that.
Oh yeah,
he's officially a MotoGP rider. Claire asks, and this is also not one that's potential that I want to answer for a very long time.
So what happens when Matt's not here?
Yeah, I just pick stuff that's funny. Claire asks, if we are always hearing that the KTM choose tires, what on earth possessed them to run softs in the sprint? It's a good question, Claire. Next question.
No. I absolutely love Ayagura's complete and utter dismissal of everyone on Saturday afternoon, and I'm going to just mention it here, where he was like, well, obviously everyone who ran the soft didn't feel comfortable in the medium, which is fantastic news for me because everyone's going to have to use the medium on Sunday. Yeah. Yet another Aguraism.
Yeah. So very funny. Did not make the most of the medium on Sunday, it should be noted, but
true,
but Graham Lee asks, and I quite liked this question because I think he's onto something, but at the same time, it's never going to happen. How about in 2026 having the sprint in daylight and the main race under the floodlights?
I've a slightly different variation on this.
Right.
I spoke to someone at the weekend who has come up with a theory that practice on the only practice session that we have left in the weekend, because FP1 and FP2 are free practice sessions of practice, which is Friday afternoon, where it all devolves into mini qualifying in the last 10 minutes anyway.
Yeah.
Should set the grid for the sprint.
I like that.
So that we have different grids.
I like that quite a lot, yeah. I think that's very good.
Yeah.
I mean,
when I heard that, I was like, ooh, I like that idea.
Yeah, and it's much less, because when they try to introduce grid variants in weekends, they usually do it at like fastest laps from the first race form.
Yeah. Whereas that one is quite natural.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Because everyone's going in time attack mode anyway, right?
Yeah. I think that's really cool. But I do quite like the idea of daytime, nighttime sort of separation. Because
no. I mean, it's weird. So Qatar's been through this weird evolution in the time that MotoGP has went there, where initially it went in September and it was a daytime race, and it was so hot that it just didn't work.
Yeah,
it was just mind-bogglingly hot.
Yeah.
And then it went to a night race, and then that solved all the problems because the temperature was cool. Then it went to a night race in
spring,
March, because it became the first race of the season. And then it started causing problems with condensation arriving when it started to cool down at night, because we're in a desert next to the sea. So there's condensation and it started almost being wet. So we had to move the race forward to the point where Moto2 and Moto3 essentially are daylight races now.
Yeah.
So then what we did this year, just to mix things up again, was because of Ramadan being in March, we moved the race back from round 1 to round 4, and the temperature went through the roof again. Yes. And it was the difference between coming in March and coming in April in Qatar is really significant. Like it was knocking on 40 degrees air temperature, like 2-3 p.m. A few days this weekend. It was really hot. And the argument probably should have been that the race was later again. So there's this like constant juggling around here. I don't think you could have an evening. The problem with having a day and night race calendar here is that you could only do it in the traditional season opening spot.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have worked this weekend because it would have been too hot during the day again.
Yeah, I agree. But it's for when they do restore it as the season opener, it probably doesn't work weekend scheduling wise, I think. Not necessarily.
Unless you make a
4-day weekend.
Well, we used to do that in Qatar.
Yeah.
Back because the window was shorter back then, so because we were all at nighttime. But unless you do make the practice session qualifying for the sprint, because then you can do the sprint before qualifying.
Yeah, there's some to it. There's some to it. I don't.
There's an idea there.
I mean, never going to happen, but was
never going to happen. Never going to happen. But it's still a good idea.
Finally, somebody on Twitter, also known as X, a cool name that I love using, mentioned that George Carlin has come up more in this podcast recently than Somkhiat Chantra. Without going into too much detail on Somkhiat Chantra's season so far, I think that's probably good for Chantra because he's had a really rough time as of late compared to where he started.
I mean, yeah, but he's kind of just quietly doing the things that a Honda rookie does. He's not setting the world on fire, but he's all right. Like he's doing a fairly decent job.
All right, you know what? Let's get into Chantra a little bit then. I like again. I have no qualms with him having the seat, etc. Blah blah blah. I want him to succeed, generally speaking, but he started the season very very encouragingly. Looked quite good there in preseason testing, and he almost is sort of there with the other rookies relative to the machinery. Then obviously Agora took the step, Aldeguer took the step, and Chandra feels like he's taken the new tracks that are coming up, and he's not getting the testing, and he feels like he's being left behind by the pack, which is a little unfortunate, I would say.
But I think maybe that'll swing a bit whenever we go back to Jerez and a circuit that he does know super well, because he's kind of, as everyone is, kind of a product of the Spanish system. So I think once we're back in Europe, maybe we'll see that close up again a little bit, because it's also been we've been to tracks that are kind of like Coda, physically demanding. Argentina, a circuit where he won't have done an awful lot of run time because it hasn't been in the calendar for a few years and things like that. I think that he needs a bit of kind of comfort blanket circuit around him, and I think Jerez is going to help with that.
So that concludes our final miscellaneous section that Matt would have never, ever, ever allowed in a million years, but it's anarchy, as it often is. Thank you for listening to us today. Today being the day that you listen. Oh my God. I need to
just call it a day, Val. Just call it a day.
I need to script these outros. Script these outros. This is a catastrophe. This was so good. There was not a single major flub. And I go into the outro and I realize I don't know words or sentences.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, I will learn. I promise to learn. See you next time.
The Athletic.